So everything we have talked about so far, we talked about how to calculate the cost of the ending inventory. Specifically, we talked about the firm can either using perpetual or periodic inventory system, and the firm may using FIFO for average cost, and the firm may, through different combinations, the firm may get different cost of the ending inventory. And we also talked about if the firm is using periodic inventory system, sometimes the firm, instead of calculating the cost of the ending inventory directly, the firm may need to do some estimation. And the method we have is gross profit method and retail inventory method for the firm to do estimation under the periodic inventory system. And however, all of these are historic. So all of those costs, those are historic costs of the inventory. And there's a problem with historic cost. So the problem with historic cost is it may have little relation with the real value of the asset. Let's continue with the apple pie example we had from last class. So supposedly that I'm using LIFO to value my apple pie inventory, and using LIFO my current apple pie inventory using historic cost, the cost of my ending apple pie inventory is valued at $30, assuming it is valued at $30. However, what if someone choked when eating my apple pie and no one is buying my apple pie for 2 days? So at the end of the week, I find that my apple pie, because it is becoming so stale. So I'm not going to, I cannot sell it for its original price. So I may only get $8 for my stale apple pie. If I'm going to sell it, I can only get $8. So does it still make sense to value my apple pie at $30 now? So even though the cost of this apple pie, the cost of my ending inventory is $30. However, due to some reasons, if I'm really going to sell it, I'm only going to get $8. Is it still make sense to value it at $30? So probably not, right? And this $8 is called the net realizable value of the inventory, NRV. It is the estimated selling price of the product minus reasonable predictable cost of completion, disposal, or transportation. So minus everything I need to pay out of the pocket in order to sell it. How much I'm going to get from selling it minus everything I need to pay to get it sold. That is the net realizable value. And in order to be conservative, firms are required to write down the inventory value when net realizable value. So when this value drops below the historic cost. So when $8, which is below $30, we need to write down the cost of my ending inventory to this $8. And the journal entry here is to debit either cost of goods sold or loss on write down of inventory and credit our inventory account. So this is the journal entry. And usually, when do we debit cost of goods sold? That is usually for usual events. And for debit on loss on write-down of inventory, that is usually for unusual event. So this rule is called the knower of cost or net realizable value. So literally, it just means that we take the knower of these two. And one thing to note is, if the firm is using either LIFO, last in first out, or retail inventory method, the ending inventory is reported at knower of cost or market. So this knower of cost or market, it is a little bit different from the knower of cost or net realizable value we are talking about here. We're not going to cover it in this class, but if you are interested, you can look at it on the book. It's a little bit complicated, but the basic idea is very similar. You just take the knower, in order to be conservative, we take the knower of the two numbers. So let's go through this method using some examples. Step 1, we need to determine in order to determine the knower of cost or net realizable value, we need to determine the net realizable value. So we already talked about from last class and the first part of today's class, we already talked about how to calculate cost. And now we need to determine the net realizable value. Let's look at an example here. Orange Ink has inventory with the following characteristics. Estimated selling price, 200. Estimated sales commissions and shipping cost, 50. Compute the net realizable value. So NRV in this situation is basically 200. How much we are going to get from selling this inventory? Minus 50, how much we need to pay out of the pocket in order to get it sold. So which is 150. And then step 2 is to compare the cost and net realizable value and the value inventory at the lower of the two. And this is the number that you are going to see on the firm's financial statement. So on the firm's financial statement, the number you are seeing is the lower of these two. So that is the number you are seeing. And it is not just the cost. So it is basically it is a result of the comparison of these two. So example, we continue from the previous example. If the cost of inventory is 180, should Orange Ink write down its inventory and by how much? So the cost is 180 and we know that the NRV is 150. So 150 NRV is lower than 180. So which means that we need to write it down. Yes, we do need to write it down. And by how much? So we need to write it down to 180. So the difference, write it down to 150. So the difference is $30. So we need to write down by $30. So this is the knower of cost or net realizable value. And so this is just a basic idea. However, when we are implementing knower of cost or net realizable value, we have different ways to implement this rule. So it can be applied to individual items, logical inventory, categories, or the entire inventory. What do we mean by this? So here is an example. Suppose the firm has 5 inventory items, A, B, C, D, and E. And A and B belong to product line 1. C, D, E belong to product line 2. So they belong to two different categories. Determine the carrying value of the inventory, assuming the knower of cost or net realizable value applied to individual items, product line, or entire inventory. So how do we do this? We're actually going to get different knower of cost or net realizable value. So we know the cost for different individual items. We know the net realizable value. And how do we apply this rule can result in totally different numbers. So let's first look at if we are going to do it, apply the knower of cost or net realizable value. If we are going to apply it to individual items. So if we apply it to individual items, we basically take the knower of cost or net realizable value to each individual item. For example, item 1, we take the cost because cost is lower. Item 2, we take item B, we take net realizable value because that is lower. Item C, we take the net realizable value. Item D, net realizable value is lower. And item E, cost is lower. So we do it by individual item and we sum it up. It will give us 395,000. And this is the cost of the ending inventory after applying this knower of cost or net realizable value rule. The second way we can do it is by product line. So basically for product line 1, the cost is 150,000. The net realizable value is 175,000. So which one is lower? 150,000, right? And then for product line 2, the cost is 265,000. The net realizable value is 256,000. So which one is lower? 256,000. And then we take and then what we do is, so we do it by product line. And then we take the sum of these two, which is 406,000. So this is the cost of the ending inventory after applying this rule by product line. As you can see, it is different from the number we're going to get if we are applying this rule to different individual items. And then the last way to do it is apply it to entire inventory. So basically, we first calculate the cost of the entire inventory. So let me just use a different color. So we first calculate the cost of the entire inventory, which is 415,000. And then we calculate the net realizable value of the entire inventory, which is 431,000. And then we take the knower of these two. So the knower of these two is 415,000. So this is the number we are going to get applying it to the entire inventory.